For most of 2022, Tanzania was one of the few countries in sub-Saharan Africa which operated within its means. Although high, the country's inflation rate remained consistent with its target of 5.4% in 2022-2023 fiscal year. At the end of the year, the country's inflation swung further in the right direction, dipping from 4.9% in November to 4.8% in December, which of course denotes a slower pace in the consumer price increase. Tanzania's inflation rate was also in line with the East African Community and Southern African Development Community convergence criteria of a maximum of 8% and a range of 3 to 7%. According to the country's National Bureau of Statistics, this relief is set to continue throughout the first quarter of the new year. Now, prices of commodities such as food and non-alcoholic beverages in the first quarter of 2023 will drop in price. During a session to discuss the state of the Tanzanian economy, Dr. Albina Chua, the NBS's general statistician, noted that the Bureau has projected that food and non-alcoholic beverages will drop to 8.4% in the first 3 months of 2023 from 9.7% recorded in December 2022. So now, joining us on the show from Lusaka, Zambia, is Mtwalo Msoni. Is an economist and, of course, a researcher. Thank you so much, Mtwalo, for joining us.
Thank you. Happy New Year to the Business Edge team.
Thank you so much. Happy New Year to you, too. Now, what are the factors that actually aided Tanzania in reducing its inflation in the outgone year, that is 2022? Let's start from there.
I think it's important to mention that over the years, Tanzania has maintained a tight fiscal policy, tight fiscal and monetary policy. In this case, tight monetary policy in the sense that it's been trying to ensure that there isn't too much money available to be borrowed by businesses and individuals by maintaining its monetary policy rate, the rate at which it can lend out money, which has been at 5% for the past 2 to 3 years. The importance of this is that it reduces the amount of money that's available for businesses and individuals to spend within the economy. And this is why I think we've been able to see the country maintain an inflation rate just below the 5% target that has been year in, year out. Also important to mention, I think, is the fact that between 2020 and 2021, the inflation rate was actually 3.3%, going to 3.7% because of the effects of the COVID pandemic on the general price of goods and services, because of the disruption in the supply of goods and services coming into Tanzania. This has now increased, I think, because of some pressure that comes from the Russia-Ukraine war, the increase in energy costs, but most importantly, it has been contained below 5% to be about at 4.8, 4.9% because of tight monetary policy, also backed by some tight fiscal policy, trying to spend within your means and not trying to excessively borrow.
So aside from a tight monetary policy, according to reports, the current administration under President Samia Suluhu Hassan was said to have heavily focused and invested in business initiatives. So I'd like you to expatiate on those business initiatives that she was able to plug finance and concentration in, and what rewards would you say were derived from those investments?
I think the form of strategy that has been taken has been in line with what Tanzania has over the years insisted, which is leaving no one behind. And in this case, trying to close the gaps in terms of employment, in terms of production, by pumping money into the people. And once you do that, you literally increase the production of basic goods and services. And in this case, I think there's been an increase in the production of necessary goods and services, which in the end reduces inflationary pressure because you don't have to import some of the necessities that go into expenditures for your day-to-day living. Essential to this has been the amount of money that has been pumped into the agricultural sector. You can imagine from about 298 billion shillings to about 984 billion shillings pumped into agricultural sector, trying to set up the farming blocks, irrigation systems, trying to ensure that the corridors for exportation and food securities are actually met within Tanzania. So the increase in the export has also contributed largely to the stabilization of inflation below 5%, despite having to see increase in energy costs. Increase in energy costs, of course, are going to be inevitable coming to 2023, considering the different economic variables that we're seeing, the Russia-Ukraine war, the phasing out of the use of fossil fuels in terms of coal and oil. But I think these have been maintained because of the amount of money that has been pumped into the production of necessary goods and services that would ordinarily be imported if there isn't enough production happening within Tanzania.
This now brings me to the next question about production. Now, is the Tanzanian government focusing on ensuring that the country is food sufficient going beyond 2023, one? Then two, looking at this export potential in the agricultural sector, do you think that it is being fully exploited?
I think going by what has happened in terms of the reforms in the agriculture sector, I could say Tanzania is on the right path. I talked about the increase in budget expenditure. You can imagine from 290 billion shillings to about 980 billion. That's like threefold of what you're spending on the agricultural sector. The objective by 2030 is try to meet the second and third SDG around food security and zeroing hunger by increasing food security within Tanzania and increasing the amount of exports. The target is to move beyond the 1.2 billion in terms of food exports, leaving Tanzania to about 5 billion US dollars in terms of food exports, of which the horticulture sector, I think, is currently contributing about 700 million US dollars in terms of exports, and this is projected to move up to 2 million. So you can see that there are significant targets there and there's lots of expenditure that's going there. There are plans to build biological control that are currently underway. For instance, in the coastal region, trying to engage more youth in agricultural farming blocks and trying to invest more in the infrastructure needs that go with the agricultural sector. Of course, this is complementary with road network as well, because you cannot export literally. You need road infrastructure, rail infrastructure to export some of these things. So these are some of the efforts that are being done by the Tanzanian government, and so far we've seen them being in the right direction. I think from last year we saw an increase in agricultural production. We've seen an insistence on diversifying on agricultural produce, and this has contributed largely to the country being partially food secure and has contributed to the country looking like an upcoming food basket for the East African region, as well as for the Southern African countries that neighbor with Tanzania.
All right, let's leave agriculture, which of course undoubtedly is a major money spinner for the country. Let's look at the coal industry. As of last year up to November, the country actually exported about $141.6 million. That's approximately 325.6 Tanzanian shillings worth of coal outside of the shores of the country, due to the global energy demand occasioned by, of course, the crisis that plagues the entire globe. Now, do you expect the demands to continue for the country? Because, hey, what we're looking at is how to ensure that Tanzania generates more revenue to fuel its economy in 2023.
Well, there's been a power deficit across the African continent, across the world, fueled, of course, by the Russia-Ukraine war and also fueled by climate change, especially for African countries. There's increase in demand of minerals and metals that would go into the production. But I think this has been also contrary to some of the global, in terms of... Hello?
Yeah, go ahead,
Can you hear
please.
me?
Go ahead.
So I think, yes, so I think there has been some power deficit deficit that we've seen across the world, and that has seen some of these products, and this is the reason why we saw an increase in the supply of coal. But it's important to mention that we're currently moving towards commitments by countries, policies that are looking to phase out the use of coal and gas. So we need to see a reduction in the demand of these commodities and see an increase in the demand of commodities that are going to fuel the energy transition. So I do not see an increase in demand for coal over the next coming years because of global commitments of countries to phase out coal and the use of oil, but rather we probably need to look at the use of renewable energies. And I think most countries that Tanzania had been exporting the coal to are looking at homegrown initiatives for the use of renewable energy to reduce the demand on the coal. So this, of course, doesn't happen overnight. It happens over the long term, but I think the reduction will be seen over the years. We might not be able to see the same demand in terms of coal for the coming years, but we'll be able to see a reduction in demand. Eventually, I think the demand of coal will be subdued because of the energy transition, which all countries across the world are currently going through. And of course, it is the future and it is a way to deal with some of the climate crisis effects that we're seeing currently.
Okay, well, during the fiscal year, Tanzania was said to have also invested heavily in the trade and tourism sectors amongst its foreign partners, because that's another avenue whereby Tanzania believes that it has the potential to generate revenue. Now, should we begin to look at Tanzania as an emerging economic power? Most especially in 2023, can we consider it as a power or force to reckon with in 2023 in terms of its economy?
Yes, and to contextualize this, the World Bank projected that sub-Saharan African countries would grow by 3.6% in 2023, and Tanzania stands out having been one of those countries that was listed above the average, projected to grow about at 5.3% in 2023. This, of course, is driven by some of the sectors that we've talked about in terms of tourism and in terms of the service sector. Tanzania has always been that powerhouse in terms of having an abundance of natural resources, which would form a good basis to attract lots of tourists coming into the country. And I think with some of the investments that have been favorable in terms of infrastructure for hotels and the climate being made favorable to attract additional investments and tourists in the tourism sector, we might be seeing the country being a powerhouse not only in East Africa, but across the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. That is guaranteed, and I think the projections are pointing in that direction. Even for the fiscal year of 2022 that ended, we saw the country averaging growth of about 4.9%, which was way higher than what most countries averaged. It is way higher than what is their current population growth at 3%. So we are seeing for Tanzania at least an increase in per capita incomes. That's like the income distribution per individual. So the country is one to watch out for. I think, in my opinion, a very good investment destinations because the economic variables currently work in their favor.
So invariably, we are also expected to see some significant growth in the micro, small, and medium enterprises sector in the new year. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, we will see that growth, and it's also been driven by the increased availability of financial services in terms of fintech. Tanzania has been one of those leaders in terms of the use of mobile money, simplified payments, simplified services regarding the lending and the borrowing of money. So we are likely to see growth even in that sector. And remember, at the start of the show, we think we touched on government efforts being in line with leaving no one behind, and lots of investments coming into the small scale and medium enterprises.
All right, finally, Mtwalo, despite the fact that we understand that several countries have their several peculiarities, challenges, and all whatnot. What lessons do you think that other African countries can draw from Tanzania, and what the government's efforts are in transforming the economy that you think can benefit their own economies and, bring about replication of economic boom for the entire continent?
I think most countries currently are struggling with aspects of inflation, trying to keep the cost of life, the cost of living affordable for the citizens, and Tanzania presents some of the valuable lessons in terms of tight monetary policy, but at the same time backing it with an increase in the production of necessary goods and services. Tanzania has what I would term as an input substitution industrialization strategy, which tries to basically supplement what they would ordinarily import in terms of basic commodities required for living and produce them locally. The agricultural sector has been singled out as a strategic sector for this purpose. We've seen an increase in terms of expenditure in the agricultural sector, subsidies in terms of fertilizers, an increase in farming blocks, an increase in the hectareage that's been allocated to agriculture, and ambitious plans in terms of meeting food security and exports. These are valuable lessons for other African countries. African countries are also endowed with lots of natural resources, but large potential to attract lots of tourists across Tanzania has leveraged on this and has heavily invested in this. These are valuable lessons for other African countries to be able to say that if we invest more in providing necessary infrastructure that will support the tourism sector, we might be able to see more forex coming in. Tanzania is a very strategic corridor for Southern African countries in terms of the exportation and importation of various goods and services. I think this has been one of the reasons why there's been some heavy investment in infrastructure over the years, and we've been able to see that this has worked for them because the increase in trade has over the years contributed to favorable economic growth within the country and job creation along the value chain, with supporting not only Tanzania but other countries with the exportation and importation of goods and services.
Thank you so much, Mtwalo. Well, I tell you that the conversation has always been around this, having African countries look inward to explore and exploit the several sectors of the economy to see how they can bring about even growth to ensure that this boom spreads to other African countries and we have a more viable continental economy. And it's quite nice to see that Tanzania is doing it, just as Senegal is also looking towards that trajectory. Thank you so much for lending your voice to this discuss.
Thank you so much. The pleasure has been mine.